The night my wife handed me divorce papers across our kitchen table, I was still wearing my scrubs. I hadn't even set my bag down. I'd just come off a 14-hour shift, and the first thing she said to me wasn't hello. It was, "I need you to read this." I didn't break down. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and read every page. Then I looked up at her and said, "Okay, if that's what you want." The expression on her face told me everything. She'd expected a war. What she got was silence. And somehow, that was worse for her. My name is Arthur Voss. I'm 44 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon at Mercy General, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades putting broken people back together. The irony of not seeing what was falling apart in my own home is not lost on me. Not even a little. My wife and I had been married 11 years. She worked in brand consulting, mostly remote, flexible hours. The kind of life that looked good in Instagram captions. We had a house in a quiet suburb outside Columbus. 2 cars, a guest room we'd talked about turning into a nursery for years but never did. On paper, it looked like everything. What paper doesn't show is the slow erosion. The dinners I missed, the anniversaries I rescheduled, the way she stopped asking how my day was. And I stopped noticing that she'd stopped. When you spend your nights elbow deep in someone else's emergency, it becomes very easy to believe that your own life is fine by comparison. Nothing is bleeding. No one is coding. Everything must be okay. She handed me those papers on a Thursday. I remember because I always work Thursdays. Had for 3 years. She knew my schedule better than I did. I read through the filing slowly. Standard dissolution. Division of assets. She wanted the house, half of my retirement account, and what was listed as shared investment funds. That last part caught my eye, but I didn't react. I just folded the papers back along their crease and set them on the table. "Have you talked to someone about this?" I asked. "A lawyer," she said. "Several months ago." Several months. I let that sit in the room with us for a moment. "All right," I said. "I'll get my own counsel." She'd been watching me the whole time, waiting for tears or anger, maybe both. I gave her neither. I stood up, picked up my bag from where I dropped it by the door, walked to our bedroom, and changed out of my scrubs. When I came back out, she was still at the table. "That's it?" she said. "You're not going to say anything? What would you like me to say?" She didn't have an answer for that. She left that night to stay with her sister. I sat in our kitchen with a glass of water and the quiet hum of the refrigerator and thought about the last time I'd actually felt at home in this house. I couldn't remember. I didn't tell anyone at work right away. Not my chief resident. Not the nurses I'd worked alongside for a decade. Not my colleague and closest friend, Philip, who I'd known since medical school. I needed a few days to let the shape of it settle before I could talk about it out loud. 3 days after she left, I got a text. Just 3 words. "We should talk." I stared at my phone between patients. The man I used to be would have called immediately. Cleared his afternoon. Driven to wherever she was. That man had been slowly disappearing for longer than I realized. I typed back, "On until 8. Can talk after." She didn't reply for 6 hours. When she did, it was just, never mind. That evening, I stopped by Philip's house on the way home. His wife answered the door, surprised to see me, and called him down from upstairs. He took one look at my face and handed me a beer without being asked. We sat on his back porch. I told him everything. He didn't say much at first. Philip was never someone who filled silence just to fill it. He listened. Then he asked one question. "Do you know what shared investment funds means?" I told him I assumed it was our joint brokerage account, the one we'd opened when we bought the house. He shook his head slowly. "I'd checked that. All of it." "When did you last look at your joint accounts?" I thought about it. "When did you last look at your joint accounts?" I thought about it, honestly thought about it. I handled the mortgage and utilities from my own account. She'd taken over managing everything else during the first year of the pandemic. Said it was easier since she worked from home. I'd let her. I trusted her. "I haven't looked in a while," I admitted. "Look tonight," he said. I did. The joint investment account I'd never paid much attention to had a balance of $94,000. It had been opened 22 months ago, during a stretch when I was covering double shifts following a staff shortage. The contributions had been coming from our household savings account, my salary direct deposits, in amounts small enough not to trip any alerts. The account was in both our names, but the contact email and linked phone number were hers. I sat at my desk for a long time after that. The account by itself wasn't theft. Legally, it was joint, but the timing, the amounts, the fact that she'd managed it without ever mentioning it. 11 years of marriage, and she'd never once said, "Hey, I opened us a new investment account." Told me something different than what the paperwork claimed. I called my attorney the next morning, a woman I'd been referred to by the hospital's legal team years ago for a contract dispute. She was thorough and direct, two things I respected. "Don't move any money," she said. "Don't close anything. And send me everything you have." I did. I also changed every password I had: email, banking, hospital portal, everything. The following week, my brother called. He lived 3 hours away in Pittsburgh. He said my mother had been trying to reach me. I'd missed 2 of her calls without realizing it. "She's not sick or anything," he said preemptively. "She's just worried." You went quiet. I'd had a lot going on. "I know. She told me about you and He stopped. "She heard something." "It's true," I said. "We're filing." He exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry, Art. Don't be." "I'm not sure I am." He was quiet for a moment. "You want to come up this weekend? Kids would love to see you. I'm coaching Lena's soccer game Saturday morning." I thought about it. My niece Lena was 8. Last time I'd seen her was Christmas, and she'd spent 20 minutes showing me a card trick she'd been practicing. I'd been distracted, half thinking about a patient I'd operated on that afternoon. "Yeah," I said. "I'll come up." I drove to Pittsburgh on Saturday morning. My brother and I watched Lena's team lose spectacularly, cheered anyway, ate bad hot dogs at a folding table, and I helped his youngest build a birdhouse from a kit they'd had in the garage for a year. It was the most normal I'd felt in weeks. On the drive back Sunday afternoon, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Then I pulled over at a rest stop outside of Zanesville and listened to it. Her voice was careful, measured. She said she'd been thinking. That maybe she'd made a decision too quickly. That she wanted to sit down and have a real conversation before things went any further. I sat in the parking lot and looked at the trucks pulling in and out. An older man walking a small dog along the strip of grass between the lot and the highway. A family with 3 kids unloading from a minivan. The youngest running ahead and the parents calling after her. I called my attorney instead. She'd already heard from my wife's attorney. There was a request to pause proceedings, no formal reason given. "Happens sometimes," my attorney said. "Could be a strategy. Could be genuine. Either way, my advice is to keep going unless you've decided differently." "Keep going," I said. The forensic accounting came back 2 weeks later. Philip had connected me with someone who specialized in exactly this kind of work. A quiet man named Edmund, who wore plain suits and spoke in a way that suggested he'd seen everything twice already. He laid it out simply. 22 months of systematic transfers. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have flagged an alert. Just steady, careful, incremental. The account had been positioned to receive half of my expected bonus. She'd known the amount because I'd told her, proudly, during a phone call while I was covering extra shifts. The filing had been started 6 months before she handed me those papers. The lawyer she'd consulted first was not a family attorney. He was an asset division specialist. Edmund slid the folder across the table to me. "This doesn't mean she committed a crime," he said evenly. "Joint assets are complicated. But it does mean the court should see the full picture." "Send everything to my attorney," I said. Walking out of that meeting, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from the discovery of betrayal, but from realizing how long it had been happening while you were busy believing everything was fine. She texted again that night. She said she missed me. She asked if we could get dinner somewhere neutral, just to talk. I thought about the paperwork, the account, the lawyer she'd hired months before she said a word to me, the careful, quiet architecture of an exit built while I was working nights, saving strangers. I texted back, "Please direct any communication to our attorneys going forward." Her response came in under a minute. "Arthur, please." I didn't reply. The encounter happened at a mutual friend's gallery opening. I almost didn't go. I'd been invited weeks before everything fell apart, and a part of me considered backing out. But I had too much respect for the artist, an old friend from college who'd been working toward this show for 2 years, to skip it without good reason. So I went. She was there. I didn't know she would be. She crossed the room to me within 10 minutes of my arrival. She looked composed, but her hands were wrapped around her wine glass like she needed something to hold on to. "Can we please talk, just for a minute?" I kept my voice low because we were in public and I had some respect for the situation. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Arthur." She stepped closer. "I made a serious mistake." "I know that." I panicked about the future and I handled it completely wrong. Which part? I asked. The filing? Or the 22 months before it? The color shifted in her face. Edmund is thorough, I added. She glanced around, conscious of where we were. It was our money. I was protecting myself. From what? I never threatened you. I never gave you reason to protect yourself from me. You were never there, she said, and her voice cracked a little. Not with grief, I thought. With frustration. I was alone in that house 4 nights a week for years. I know, I said. And I meant it. You deserved a partner who could be present. I genuinely believe that. But you didn't ask for that conversation. You didn't say you were unhappy in a way that gave us a chance to fix it. You made a plan, and that's a different thing entirely. She didn't have a response. I hope you build a good life, I said. I mean that. I said goodnight to the artist, thanked her for the invitation, and left. Driving home, I felt something settle. Not relief exactly. More like the particular stillness that comes after a long surgery when you close and everything is held the way it should. The hard part was done. Whatever came after would be easier than what I'd been carrying. My attorney called the following week with news. Her attorney had reached out with a revised offer. She was dropping the claim on my retirement account entirely and accepting a straightforward split of existing liquid assets. The house would be listed, proceeds divided evenly. That's a significant walkback from her original position, my attorney said, not quite concealing her satisfaction. Why the change? I don't know, but I'd take it. I did. Philip told me later, over drinks, that he'd heard through someone who knew someone, that the man she'd been involved with, and there had been someone. The gallery appearance had confirmed it for me in a way I hadn't quite let myself name before, had taken a position in Denver and was not, apparently interested in a committed relationship across state lines. I absorbed that quietly. You okay? Philip asked. Yeah, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I'm actually okay. The hospital offered me a fellowship program in San Francisco, 6 months, advanced trauma protocols, working alongside one of the best surgical teams in the country. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without thinking, thrown myself into the work the way I always had, used the distance as an excuse not to feel anything. Instead, I sat with it for a week. I called my brother. I told him about the offer. Are you going to take it? He asked. I don't know yet. What would you do? He thought for a moment. I'd think about what I'd be going toward versus what I'd be going away from. Those feel similar, but they're not. That stayed with me. In the end, I negotiated a different arrangement, a 6-month consulting relationship, most of it remote, with 2 weeks on-site in the first and final months. I could do the work. I could advance the research. And I could stay close to my brother, my nieces, the city I'd built my life in. The house sold in 3 weeks. I rented an apartment near the hospital while I figured out the next thing. It was small, almost aggressively so, after 11 years in a 4-bedroom colonial, but it was mine. Every object in it was something I'd chosen. There was a kind of freedom in that I hadn't expected. I started cooking again, properly. I'd always liked it and had mostly stopped, somewhere in the years of takeout and late arrivals home. I found a farmer's market 2 blocks from my apartment on Saturday mornings. I went most weekends. It became a small ritual, unhurried, ordinary in the best possible way. My niece Lena had started asking me questions about being a doctor, not the dramatic television version, the real one. What does it actually feel like when something goes wrong? How do you keep going after a bad shift? I started trying to answer her honestly, which meant I had to think honestly, which was its own slow kind of work. I mentored a resident that fall, a young woman named Alice who had the same relentless focus I recognized from my own early years, the tendency to treat rest as a failure. I told her once, in the break room between cases, that the best technical skill in the world has a ceiling if you don't also learn to take care of yourself. She looked at me like I was saying something radical. I suppose, coming from me it was. My attorney called in November to tell me the divorce was finalized. I thanked her, and she told me I'd been one of her calmer clients, which I took as a compliment. I made a reservation at a restaurant I'd been meaning to try for 2 years, went by myself, sat at the bar, ordered the tasting menu, and spent 2 hours just eating well and watching the city outside the window. It was one of the better evenings I'd had in a long time. My brother and his family hosted Thanksgiving. His house was loud and warm in the way that houses with young children always are. Crayon drawings on the refrigerator, small shoes abandoned at the door, a chaotic and genuine abundance of noise. My mother was there. She watched me most of the evening with the careful attention that mothers have, that particular brand of observation that misses nothing. After dinner, when the kids were occupied and my brother was doing dishes, she sat beside me in the living room. "You look better," she said. "I feel better. You looked like yourself at Christmas." She paused. "Even when you were young, you could go very quiet when something was wrong. Quiet in a way that looked fine from the outside. I learned it from you," I told her. And she laughed, because it was true. She told me that she'd run into my ex-wife's mother at a church event, that she'd heard the finalized papers had come through, and that my ex-wife was seeing someone in Denver seriously enough that she was considering relocating. I felt nothing complicated about that, only a simple and genuine wish that it worked out for her. "You're not angry?" my mother asked. I was, for a while. I thought about how to say the next part, but the anger was mostly at myself, for not seeing it, for being so convinced that if I kept working, kept building, kept providing, that the rest would take care of itself. My mother was quiet. "The marriage ending wasn't only her fault," I said. "I don't think she handled it right. But I also wasn't present. Not really, not for a long time." She reached over and patted my hand once, the way she had when I was a boy. That winter, I started drawing up the plans for something I'd had in the back of my mind for years. Not a house exactly, though that was part of it. A piece of land I'd found 40 minutes outside the city, close enough to the hospital to be practical, far enough out to have quiet. 5 acres, mostly flat, with a stand of old trees along one edge. I'd always said I wanted to build something myself. Not through the construction alone. I was a surgeon, not a contractor, but to design it. To know it from the ground up. I started working with an architect. Slowly. No deadline. Just developing something that felt right. On the first real spring day, I drove out to the land and stood in the middle of it. The trees at the edge were just starting to bud. The ground was soft but not muddy. A red-tailed hawk was doing slow loops overhead, riding whatever thermal Ed had found up there. My phone had several messages. A follow-up from the hospital about a research grant. A text from my brother about Lena's spring recital. A note from Philip about dinner next week. An inquiry from a medical journal about a technique paper I'd submitted. I stood in that field and didn't answer any of them. Not right away. I just stood there and let the silence be what it was. The divorce had not destroyed me. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Not because I was too strong to be hurt, but because somewhere underneath all the years of noise and work and distraction and careful professional competence, there was still something solid. Something I could stand on. I hadn't known that before. I hadn't needed to know it. I'd been so busy shoring up everything around me that I hadn't thought to check whether my own ground could hold. It could. I answered my brother's text first. Told him I'd be there for the recital. Told him to tell Lena I was already practicing my applause. Then I put my phone in my pocket and stood there a while longer, watching the hawk work the sky, thinking about what I wanted to build on this ground, and feeling, for the first time in a long time, like I had enough room to think it through properly. I didn't walk away from my marriage feeling like I'd won anything. That's the part people expect, I think. The clean triumph. The score settled. That's not what it felt like at all. What it felt like was more like finishing a very long surgery. The moment the last suture goes in and you step back and the patient is stable and you realize that somewhere in the past several hours, you stopped being afraid. You just worked. And the work held. I spent 11 years believing that providing was the same thing as being present. That if the mortgage was paid and the vacations were planned and the career kept moving forward, the rest of it, the actual daily texture of a marriage, would sustain itself on goodwill and assumption. I was wrong about that. Profoundly, quietly, expensively wrong. What my wife did in those final months. The account, the attorney, the careful positioning that was her choice, and it was a dishonest one. I'm not interested in softening that. But I also can't stand in that field outside Columbus and tell you that her unhappiness wasn't real. Because I think it was. I was gone too much. Not just physically. I was absent in the way that driven people often are. So focused on the thing directly in front of them, that everything else blurs into peripheral. I thought the periphery would wait. It didn't. The thing about cause and effect, the real version, not the tidy moral the story version, is that it doesn't care about your intentions. It only responds to what you actually do. I kept choosing the hospital. She kept choosing the hospital. She kept choosing silence instead of honesty. And the accumulated weight of both those choices eventually collapsed the structure we'd built. Neither of us meant for it to go that way. It went that way anyway. Philip showing up the way he did, asking the right question, not filling the silence, connecting me to Edmund. That mattered more than he probably knows. The people who help you most in a crisis are rarely the ones who say the most. They're the ones who hand you a beer and wait. I've tried to remember that when it's my turn to show up for someone else. Lena asking me those questions about surgery, about how you keep going after a bad shift. I didn't have a good answer ready. I had to actually think about it. And thinking about it honestly meant admitting that for a long time, I hadn't been keeping going so much as pushing through. Those are different things. Keeping going requires you to feel where you are. Pushing through is just momentum and stubbornness wearing the costume of strength. I'm still learning the difference. What I know now, standing on my own ground, is that the qualities that actually carry you, the ones that matter when things fall apart, are not the ones that look impressive from the outside. They're quieter than that. The willingness to sit with an uncomfortable truth instead of running from it. The discipline to act carefully when everything in you wants to react. The honesty to look at your own failures without either collapsing under them or deflecting them onto someone else. Those aren't things you're born with. They're things you build. Slowly, usually because something made you have to. I'm still building. That part doesn't stop.